You know, I was going to open up this little presentation with kind of a joke about not being able to remember my middle name. You know, I'm old, 91 almost, and I can remember my last name, but the middle one always stumped me. And some guy called in from the audience and said it was Trailer. So I go by Trailer Parks. No, that would have been a lousy opening. But anyway, it was something that I thought about. I should probably just start with this because it's 75 years old. I did this when I was 16 years old.
Whoa.
In 1942. And the war was probably 6 months old at the time. And this man, John L. Smith, was a Marine Corps aviator who was desperately trying to keep Guadalcanal out of the hands of the Japanese. And he and his crew managed to do it. They started out with 18 Grumman F-4Fs. And 4 months later, they were down to 4. But he shot down 19 airplanes, 6 of which were the vaunted Zero, and the others were Betty bombers. But at age 27, he commanded VMF 223, Marine Fighter Squadron, and went on to become a colonel before he died. And anyway, this drawing was not treated very well over its 75-year life, but I found it and put it up as it was. And so that,
I love the shadowing and the texture that you just really bring out the lines of his face, and he doesn't look like utterly fatigued like a warrior. He looks like he has resolve, but he has hope.
yeah,
That look on his face is
yeah,
very positive.
he was a great guy, brave guy.
Yeah.
And at the end of the Guadalcanal offensive, which was really trying to defend the islands of Guadalcanal and I think Tulagi, and by the time they were finished, they had shot down something like a couple of hundred airplanes and a cruiser and all sorts of stuff. And it was an amazing story, and I don't think people realize the desperation and the resourcefulness and bravery that these guys showed. And at the same time, you have the Air Force over in Europe was also in a desperate situation fighting the Luftwaffe. That is a B-17F, one of the early models, knockout dropper, but it managed to get more missions in than any other Model F, and they weren't fully armed. They didn't have the chin turret and everything, and went through the very worst part of the war over there.
They have the highest casualties of all the B-17 models?
Yeah. 25 missions was supposed to be considered a tour. Then you were sent home or relieved and replaced. But most of the guys at that time never made it past 10 or 12.
Wow.
And B-17s didn't last very long then. But when the G model came along with the chin turret, it made things a lot better, because this airplane here, old Miss Destry, tallied up 138 missions without turning back. One mission after the other.
There's some good mechanics.
Oh yeah. And the story I'm trying to tell here is that this airplane survived 138 missions, while the airplane coming in on fire could have been on its first or second mission. The vagaries of war, some didn't last but a few hours, and others went on and on and on. But the interesting thing about this was that I worked with a guy at Boeing, a photographer named Joe Harlick, who knew this airplane and took most of the pictures of the B-17s that you see in magazines and books, all of these ground shots with the nose arc. Well, he took most of those. And he had a chance to fly back to the States after the war was over on this airplane. And he turned it down. He said it flew like it was made out of Jell-O. Everything was so loose and worn out that he refused. But the airplane made it back. And the sad thing about that was that it was immediately scrapped instead of being kept as some kind of memorial. I mean, what?
But you memorialized it with this beautiful painting.
Well, thanks.
And tell us about the painting.
Well, that was done. That was done for the 50th anniversary of the B-17 celebration that they had at Boeing Field in 1985. I was in charge of small airplane acquisition and operation on the ramp. And I was out there one day and I got a call to go into the events trailer immediately. And I thought, you know, I botched something really good. And I went in there and there were only two people there. One man sitting at a table looking at this, crying his eyes out. And a guy was standing behind him, and I asked him if there was something I could do. And he said, no, he says, that was my airplane. Oh. He was navigator on it for the last 30 missions.
30?
Yeah.
Wow.
And he said when he arrived at, I think it was Shelveston where it was based, and went out to the airplane, he was assigned old Miss Destry and went out and looked at it, and he said that he didn't want to fly in it because it had dried blood in it, vomit, patches all over the place, and he figured, well, you know, I signed up to do this and I'll do it. And he really got shaken up.
So did he get a print of that?
Yes, I signed it for him. Yeah.
Oh, how cool.
Yeah, and
you have to know that just meant a lot to him.
Oh yeah.
He was crying his eyes out when he saw it.
Oh yeah, he says you got her just the way she looked. So, but it was so interesting that Joe Harlick said, "I'm not going to fly in that thing." So that's a testament to the airplane too. You know, not only the crews. But I saw a couple of these come through Langley Field, Virginia when I was stationed there, and boy, some of them were really patched up. Crude boilerplate patches on the outside. Yeah, so they...
See, I love what else is in this picture. They're all returning from the mission. You see the tiny images of the airplanes that are still in formation.
Yeah, they're breaking up. Yeah, breaking up for a landing.
And the flares going up to say, hey, we need a little help here.
Wounded aboard, shot the flare up. Yeah. And these guys
have already landed, and they're probably dog tired.
Anxiously waiting to see what's going to happen to that one.
Yeah. Right.
But that gets probably to this, if we're on that stage of things. This airplane was flown by a friend of mine, a United Airlines pilot, and this drawing shows his departure from Arnhem, Holland during Operation Market Garden.
Yeah.
Remember a bridge too far and all that stuff. He flew 4 missions over there that day, dropping gliders, taking gliders in, dropping supplies and troops and stuff. And this shows him making his escape after his first sortie there. They were supposed to make a turn to the left and dive over Arnhem to get back home. And he said you couldn't see Arnhem for the thick black cloud of flak bursts over the city. So he made a turn to the right and dove down to almost ground level. And he said as he straightened out, he came face to face with a German 88 that fired, and he said how they missed, he couldn't figure it out. And he said they must have really surprised him because some of the crew was still in their underwear after jumping out of their bed, but that close. But he flew 4 missions back and forth, and after his 4th one, they grounded the airplane because it was so full of holes and leaking so much fuel. They had to ground it right then and there. And that goes to show you that it wasn't only the fighter pilots and the bomber pilots that went through some tough things. It was transport guys. And one of the worst things he said on their first mission across the channel towing gliders, the glider or airplane in front of them towing the glider pulled the nose off the glider. You know, the old Waco gliders had a hinged up nose so that the guys could run out in front. Well, the nose came off, and he said after it had pitched up and went nose down, all the troops spilled out of this thing as it was going down. And he said it was a bad way to start a day.
Yeah.
And so
in this view, though, you see, you really see a lot of motion. You know, you see a lot of action. I mean, you can really tell he's banking away. He's trying to get the heck out of Dodge.
Oh yeah,
on that.
Yeah. And there's battle smoke in the background. Yeah. This is his wife. They got married when they were kids, and they were still married before he passed away.
But you know, this image really makes the C-47 look like a warplane.
Yeah, it was. It was a good one.
Normally when you see them, you just don't think that.
Oh, yeah. They're well built, well designed, tough.
So let's go back in time. Tell us about the Wright Model A. Because we like early stuff too.
Okay, that was for a calendar. I did a series.
Spencer
Aircraft,
yes.
Yeah. But I did a series starting with Lilienthal and his old hang gliders, and worked up to the Wright brothers, and then I had an Ettrich Taube, and got up to the Jenny and the DH4, and I don't know where they are now. I sold some of the drawings, but that's all that was. But to start all this stuff, I pulled this up. This is the first attempt to do aviation works. When I got laid off from Boeing, nobody would hire me, so I started painting. And this was my first attempt, and still a pretty good one.
Yeah.
And when Ernie Gann, the author, saw that, he kept looking at it and he says, I've been there. He said, that's a sucker hole. Some of the early pilots thought, oh, I can go under and get through and maintain contact and, you know, get under the soup. Well, the soup closed up on them, and a lot of fatal journeys that way. So, not a nice name for it, but very descriptive. I've mentioned several times about having a painting in the Smithsonian, and I haven't shown it in any place but the book. So I had a print made of this, and this is the painting that we did for the balloon and airship wing in the Smithsonian to celebrate the bicentennial opening of it. And the only funny thing about, not funny, but interesting, was that it was a donation. They asked me if I would do it, and I said, yeah. And I thought, well, I can get a write-off on my income tax thing, you know, which I needed very badly at the time. And went ahead and put it in, and they said, no, you can't do that. You don't know the value of the painting. We don't know the value of the painting. So all you can take off of your income tax is the cost of the paint and the canvas. So.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, that was a stunner. This airplane is Worry Bird, and it was present at the 50th anniversary of the B-17. And I was walking out to the flight line one day, and the pilot came up and said, "You got some time?" I said, "Well, I think so." He says, "Well, the seat in the back is open if you want a flight." So I had a flight in Worrybird right back there, and boy, what a thrill that was.
Oh, wow.
I'll never forget that.
Before or after lunch?
Didn't matter.
Because it mattered to a lot of people whether it was before or after
man,
lunch.
that was marvelous.
That would just be so exhilarating.
But the original was purchased by a man named, his last name's George, and he bought the airplane, and he has it now and has the original drawing.
Oh, nice.
So it's pretty nice.
You got a very nice view of the P-51. It's such a gorgeous airplane.
But you know what impressed me when he had the canopy back and was, you have to run it up to shut them off, to clear everything. And the heat and the exhaust that was coming into the back of that cockpit was frightening. I mean, you could have suffocated in there. And my first thought was, all this heat that's coming out of that engine is wasted energy. And I don't know what their energy percentage was, but it couldn't have been very high. And that was a stupid thought. All the seats could be used somewhere, but it wasn't. But
that's the engineering
mind, isn't it?
Yeah.
How do we do more with less so that we last longer, right?
But the throttle response in flight, when he added power, boy, it put you back in the seat. Retarded power, you were leaned forward, and I know darn well that a good fighter pilot could use that to good advantage, because they had a 13-foot diameter prop, and it was just like a barn door when you came back. So it was really interesting, a lot of fun. This airplane is in the Museum of Flight. I worked on it with Lou Wallach and the crew there that was restoring it, and I did all of the decorative art on it. And that was a part of a calendar too for Spencer Aircraft. And Lou Wallach's widow has the original drawing. And great little airplane.
How did it fly, the replica?
Beautifully. Oh yeah, he loved it. He was in partnership with another guy that flew nose draggers, or tricycle geared stuff, and was supposed to fly it, and Lou talked him out of it because it's short coupled, tail dragger, and boy, they'll bite you in a hurry if you don't know what you're doing. So
does it have worse handling if your CG is higher than the length? I mean, that would be like the close
Stearman. I've flown Stearmans, and they're that way. That upper wing, you can get it going, and there's some inertia up there that you have to control. And they're really touchy when they're on the ground. They're wanting to turn all the time. So this has modern disc brakes and a controllable pitch prop that the original didn't have. And it's really funny. Some older pilots look at that and says, "That's not right."
Well, it is, because it's accurate, because it's a particular airplane.
Yeah, it's a modernization. But I did air shows up at Abbotsford several times when he was there with it, and boy, it was sure fun to see that fly. So what do we have over here? Another Boeing airplane, Boeing 247. This is the one that the Museum of Flight has. And the gentleman that bought that airplane, Jack Leffler, again asked me if I had some free time one day, the day after they brought it up here, and I said, "Well, sure. What do you need?" He says, "Well, why don't you get in the right seat and let's go flying?" So I got an hour's flying time in that old beast, and that's the way it looked when it was in service back in '33. But It's the B-17 is just like that, only with 2 more engines. The wing, the way it flew, and everything, it was just a 247 that had been enlarged. And
does the museum's example today have that reverse rake on the windshield?
no,
So
they changed
they
it.
modified it.
Yeah,
Okay.
but that's the way it looked when it first came out.
Yeah.
And Jack told me that they were really not very smart when they did that reverse V, because you could get a big wad of ice forming on it,
No.
icy conditions, so they had to get rid of that in a hurry. This, of course, was in the, not of course, but it was in the book that I illustrated for Ernest Gann. He flew for Matson Airlines after the war, and this is one of the airplanes that he flew. And this was a Matson Lines ship, the Lurleen. And he said once in a while they would catch the Lurleen in the middle of the Pacific and buzz it on the way through. Give it a little buzz job, and you can see everybody waving their hanky and whatever. And that was pretty interesting. My wife, Judy, took this ship from Hawaii back to the States when she was there. So it's in the family a little bit, But that Matson Lines was shut down by good old Juan Tripp, who could not take any competition in the Pacific with anybody else. So it didn't last very long. This was in the book also to illustrate the rise of the Douglas fleet. This looks like a DC-3, but officially it is a DST, Douglas Sleeper Transport. You can tell by the little windows up above the regular passenger windows. And C.R. Smith got to thinking about this nighttime Douglas Sleeper, and he said, you had to widen the fuselage to get the berths in. Why don't we make a daytime transport out of that and add another whole row of seats in the middle? And that's how the DC-3 got started. This was my first attempt to paint with oil paints. And I was working on it Thanksgiving Eve, November of 1971. While I was working on it, I had my airline's radio turned on, listening to the air traffic, and a pilot came on and said, "We're being hijacked." And it woke me up a little bit. So I listened to it, sitting in there trying to paint and listening to all this going on. It turned out to be the D.B. Cooper thing. And listened to all of the chatter that was going on, and when he finally got the parachutes and everything that he asked for, the money, they took off, and we were renting a little place at Star Lake, which is southeast of SeaTac Airport. The airplane flew right over the house as I was listening to them talking to that. So there's a little bit of history there. And a gentleman that came in the other day looking at that is an airline pilot, and he said that Stapleton Airport is where this is. 1930. He says there's a shopping mall there now where the original Stapleton was, but that happens a lot.
I like the lighting in that. You've got a floodlight or something over there that's illuminating everything and kind of backlit, and you see the reflection off the bottom.
Well, I'll be honest, I was working from an old photo, and I added the figures. Trying to tell the story about the Wright J5. There's a mechanic looking at one of the mags, and they've just offloaded the mail from this airplane and putting it in that one to continue it. My favorite old airplane there is Stearman C3. Beautiful.
And those big things on the bottom surface of the top wing, those are lights?
Mm-hmm.
So they could see to land at night, or what?
Landing lights.
Yeah.
And they were pretty powerful. I remember seeing them when I was a kid.
Those things aren't small.
No. I can't remember what the candle power was, but it was astronomically bright.
Right.
And that's what they had. This is a DC-1, the DC-1, flown by Eddie Rickenbacker and Jack Fry after a flight from Los Angeles, and the title, DC-1 on the downwind at Newark, tells about their arrival at Newark Airport. They were flying the last sack of civilian airmail, contract airmail. Roosevelt cut it out, took it away from the civilian operators, turned it over to the Air Force, who immediately lost 6 pilots in 3 months due to the fact that they did not have the equipment, the airplanes, or the training to fly in the weather. So they flew the last sack of contract mail across the country, and before they left Los Angeles, they were told that there would be a storm arriving at about noon. Well, you can see the storm here coming in off the coast, and they landed, I believe, at 12:15. So they not only beat the storm, they not only flew the last sack of civil airmail, but they broke the transcontinental speed record with the airplane. And Ernie Gann used to fly out of this airport, and you can see that the runways are cinders, coal cinders. And he said to make a nighttime landing there was a real challenge because the cinders gobbled up the landing lights. Oh. You still didn't know where
the
surface.
And he had no depth perception, right?
Yeah. And he said some landings were just rude arrivals. But some old pilots looked at this painting and they immediately recognized Newark, Libby Owens Ford factory there, and they started pointing out things. Well, this is police department. This is a Greek restaurant. This was the TWA hangar, American Airlines, and it was really fun to see them, go back and relive some of the flying that they did.
But how did you research that airport and get that building information? Do you have some pictures? Or
I have a picture. I found an old picture of Newark Airport. There were no airplanes in it. It was just an aerial view of it. I used it. I did a lot of digging and researching and drawing, and these weren't easy to do.
Well, yeah, because a lot of people can figure out how to do a decent drawing of an airplane, but they never do the research or get the history.
No. This is interesting. This is a DC-2 flying over Java rice fields. And, again, it was in the book describing the history of the early transports. Ernie Gann wrote a book called Ernie Gann's Flying Circus, which I illustrated. I think there's 19 paintings in it. And it was celebrating worldwide commercial aviation, not just U.S. So we showed a DC-2 flying over Java, and I got a call one day from an old pilot. He says, I see that you've got the quarter-inch cable shown that wrapped around the cowling to hold it on. And I thought, well, I didn't know what that was. He says, oh yeah, there was a groove in the cowling that the cable went in, and they bolted it up at the bottom. And he said it was kind of a crude way of doing it, but you know what? I never heard of one of those cowling coming off. It's really, really funny.
Now that's an unpressurized cabin.
That's right. Yeah.
So what kind of altitude did they fly at?
Oh,
like 10, 12,000?
no, 9.
Okay.
10,000 was about the limit on people. But
So they had to fly in the weather.
Yeah. They got under it or around it or whatever, had to land.
Would they cancel if the weather was really bad?
Oh, yeah. But one of the fun stories about this airplane was I met an old DC-2 pilot in Friday Harbor, and he was a co-pilot at the time, and the cabin heat wasn't working. And the pilot sent him back to the back end to check the heater to see why it wasn't working. And to get to the heater, you had to go through the john, the toilet. And there was a little square door that you had to sort of climb through and go back. And the cabin heat was by steam. They had a little steam generator that produced steam heat to heat the cabin. And he got it running, opened the door, and got one leg through when the door slammed shut, and a woman started screaming. She was in there. That was really funny. He says, here I was with 1 foot in there. I couldn't get it out or I couldn't get it forward. And this woman said, he said she must have weighed 250 because I couldn't budge anything. He said, there I was. His name was John. He says, there I was, John stuck in the John. And real fun story about it. But so we've done the DC-1, the DC-2, the DC-3, Boeing 377 Stratocruiser, which was based on the B-50 bomber. All of this was B-50 and with a double-deck fuselage on it. That was in the book. The airplane really was not well liked by the airlines. The passengers loved it, though, because of the lounge that they could take a little spiral staircase down to the back end there. I think that's the window to it there someplace. And my wife flew on these coming back from Hawaii, and she said it was wonderful. But it really didn't work out very well. The RF-30 or 4360 engines were a nightmare to keep running, and the airlines just didn't like it very much. But it's a pretty picture, and it was in the book. This is one of my favorites.
Well, you worked on that.
Yeah, first takeoff of the Dash 80. I worked on it. And watched Tex Johnson testing it before its first flight, running it up and down Renton Airport, slamming the brakes on after he got to takeoff speed, making swerving turns. I mean, the smoke that the tires are generating was tremendous. And one day he was taxiing back, going this way. I was up on Rainier Avenue watching, slowly taxiing to the north, and all of a sudden the airplane started to lean to the left. And I thought a hole had appeared in the taxiway until we saw the landing gear parts coming up through the trailing edge. And the landing gear was cantilevered off the rear spar by a torque box. And they were worried that this torque box might fail, and it did. The trunnion bearing broke and allowed the gear to swivel back and up through the trailing edge.
Bad day.
And we saw this being built while we were working on the KC-97G, the military tanker version of that. And they erected a tall tarpaulin wall, but we could see over the wall when we were working on the KC. And we saw the tooling being bolted to the floor over there, and the wings were swept back, and we thought, oh boy, something new's coming. And we watched them build that thing from the ground up there in the hangar. And
so were the people that built it, they were sworn to secrecy? They couldn't talk to any other employees or tell them about it? Or something?
I never met one. To be honest with you, I don't know.
Okay.
But they kept the prying eyes away from it until it was sitting there all ready to go, and took it out and painted it. And but you know, the landing gear failure allowed them to test the metal, or take a look at the metal that was in that trunnion bearing, trace the metal batch back to whatever else was made in it, the fin terminals, the engine strut, engine mount terminals.
A few other pieces, in other words, that we wouldn't want to let go.
It would have let go in flight, they said. And so they pulled the airplane in, and one day we got up there looking at it, and it was scattered all over the floor. All the engines were off, the struts, the landing gear, the tail, and they had to redo all of that stuff before it flew. But I also saw Tex roll it over the boat race course out there in Lake Washington. That was really showing my profession as a photographer. I had a movie camera in hand and saw him coming, filming, and I saw the nose come up, and it kept getting higher and higher, and I took the camera down to see what was going on. He starts this beautiful aileron roll over the lake. Here I was with the camera hanging down, and a guy next to me, I said, he rolled it, and a guy next to me says, no, you can't roll a big airplane like that. And I said, well, he just did. No, it was something else. So Tex Johnson turned around and came to the south, pulled it up, did another roll. I was still standing there with my camera down by my... missed the whole thing. So anyway, he did it. And I knew the flight engineer at the time that was on the airplane. And he said if you had closed your eyes, you would never have known. He said it was 1G all the way around the whole thing. So you'd never have known it. And any engineer would know that if you had sustained inverted flight, you could cause some horrendous damage to the constant speed drives. They'd run out of oil. You'd siphon fuel out of the tanks.
It'd run right out the vent.
Yeah, the vents would fill, the vent stringers at the top, and it'd just siphon it right up. So he didn't do that. But that was a beautiful thing to see. But just too dumb to film it.
So did the guy acknowledge when he did it the second time that maybe it was something?
He wouldn't answer. You know, I said, what was that? He just... I worked on this. This was the next thing after the Dash 80. KC-135. This is the first one, 53118. And worked a lot of hard work on that one. Did a lot of the drawings and put it together. And I still think it's the prettiest airplane of all. I don't know how you can beat it. And there's one thing that is different on this airplane versus the 707. The crown line of the 707 was raised 6 inches, and the point of tangency where this conic meets the upper crown line was moved aft, so you don't have the symmetry of the shape that was on the KC-135. Just a beautiful, beautiful design.
Used to be with background pictures like that, but this one just never.
No, I just wanted a neutral background for the profile so that it wouldn't challenge or cause a problem with any of the other colors. This is straight out of the can. It's buff titanium gesso, and it's the same color for all of them. So if I make a mistake, I can dip into that can and correct it without having to mix something. This was another painting that was in the book. It is a short Kent that British or Imperial Airways. They flew from Italy, I can't remember where, across the Mediterranean to Alexandria, and then flew down the Nile all the way to Cape Town, South Africa. 17 passengers. They didn't get over 1,500 feet usually. Flew down the Nile, and this shows them taking off at Khartoum. And again, I had to dig around in a lot of research material there. But it was a very difficult painting to do. To get all of these things to look the same. I think I remember there's 155 wing ribs in the upper wing of it. I didn't get them all, but you had to get the layout right. And it was a pretty luxurious service. It would have been nice to do today, I think.
Sure sounds like it would be fun.
Yeah.
The light in there is interesting. I mean, this is almost, it's got a little less realism maybe in it.
Uh-uh.
No, don't misunderstand me. What I mean is just in the composition, it looks dreamy.
No.
I mean, I'm not doubting the accuracy in any way, Bob. I would never do that. But
the lighting is coming right down this way.
yeah.
Is he missing a rib?
Sunset?
No, the air was full of sand, usually, you know.
So you'd get
a little bit
orange
windy,
sunsets?
you'd get an orange.
Or sunrise. Is that sunrise or sunset?
No, midday.
Midday.
And I think the composition worked out pretty well with these old boatmen here.
Oh, yeah.
Going into the sails and right back up to the airplane. And,
It's very dreamy.
a little bit of water coming off of it still. So that was a hard one to do.
Yeah.
Difficult. This is probably the most interesting painting to me because when I was stationed at Langley Field, I went to bed one night, got my bunk, and the bunk next to me was empty. When I woke up the next morning, there was a guy sleeping in it. And I got up, went to get cleaned up to take a shower, and he came in while I was in there, and the shower there at Langley Field, or old barracks, was a communal type thing, just a great big tile room with a bunch of shower heads in it. So he came in to get cleaned up too, and he had a fresh scar on his abdomen from his crotch right up to his breastbone. And you could see the stitch marks were still showing, like a big purple centipede. And I learned pretty quick in the Air Force, you don't ask people what happened or anything about it. But being a jokester, I said, you know, you must have been in a real knife fight. He laughed, said, yeah, a British field surgeon did that to me. And then he told the story of being the tail gunner on this airplane on their 22nd mission. Had just finished crossing the channel into Belgium when an airplane slid out of position and cut the tail off of this airplane. He was still in it. So he tried to escape through the escape hatch, the gunner's escape hatch. It was jammed shut. He went forward to where it was cut right here and couldn't get around the tail wheel and some of the wreckage. So he went back to his little bicycle type seat, strapped himself in, and rode it down 13,000 feet. And obviously survived. But the airplane hit a huge oak tree instead of a hard impact on the ground, and the oak tree cushioned the fall. And some Belgian farmers were tending their fields when it happened. They tried to get him out of the airplane and couldn't. He was impaled, so they got the village blacksmith to cut him out of it. Took him to a field hospital where the British patched him up. Eventually, he was sent to an American hospital in England and recovered a little bit, and then they sent him home, and he was 19 years of age and 2 months from the incident when he came to work with us there at Langley Field, Virginia. And I don't think people realize anymore how that worked during the war, but he still had this fresh scar and was on duty.
So was he...
And the funny thing, the name of his airplane was Mr. Lucky. This is just the Boeing pea shooter, Boeing's last fighter design, built in 1933, great little airplane, but I did it because of the wild color scheme that they were able to put on them then. There was no war going on, and all of the pursuit groups had their own color scheme for these airplanes, and some of them were really beautiful. I'm working on one at home now that was olive drab with black and white stripes on it, and they had variations of it, but I think this is the nicest one. But one interesting little thing was that here we have the kicking ass 95th Pursuit Group emblem, and it's the same one that's on Lew Wallace's P-12.
Yes. Yeah, but the phrase "kicking ass" back then, did it mean the same thing as today?
Yeah,
it did. Okay,
yeah,
cool. So it's
we're tough. Get out of our way. Yeah.
Now it says in the caption here that these actually shot down a bomber in 3 zeros.
That's right.
Attack on Pearl Harbor.
Attack on Pearl Harbor. Yeah, they did account for some. Actually, yeah. This is one of the toughest profile paintings to do because the airplane was painted with aluminized enamel. It wasn't metal. So it was kind of tough to capture the right color and the right light. But it was one of the Boeing greats, and people love it. And so I did a painting of it to carry it along through with the profiles. And one of the most interesting things about it was that the original did not have these outboard fins on the tail. It just had a small, I guess this was it, with a small rudder back there. And when the test pilot took off, he radioed back, he says, "I can't turn this damn airplane." And he had to use asymmetrical thrust to turn it because the rudder was far too small. So they added these big fins and rudders out at the tips of the horizontal tail. But it was a very glamorous and successful airplane. Pan Am flew it. This was the first one, I think, California Clipper.
How many years was that in service?
39 until 44. They used them during the war. BOAC used them. And Pan Am used them. And one of the most interesting stories is when the war broke out, they were told not to fly west to east to get home because of the Japanese attack and everything. They turned around. I can't remember where they were. I think they may have been on their way to the Philippines. They turned around and made their way back home, flying from east to west, skipping and hopping and jumping around through India and the Mediterranean, and finally got home. And one of them had to make a forced landing in the middle of the Pacific. I don't remember which one, but they were found, or they got a destroyer to it to get the people off. They got the people off of it, but in the process, it got so bashed and battered, banging up against the destroyer, that they couldn't tow it, they couldn't fly it, so they decided to sink it. And they poured 6-inch shells into it, I don't know how many, to try to get enough to sink the airplane. And they said it was a tough airplane to sink.
That's all the black things, the doors or the windows or the windows? How come it's an angle? It's a kind of V-shaped angle? Goes up?
Oh yeah, it had several decks. It had a library, a sitting room, and a galley. I think the daytime version carried 60 people, 64 people or something. And oh yeah, it was quite luxurious. Here's the entry door right here. Walked up the sponsons and went into the airplane.
How many we built, roughly?
Just a handful.
just a handful, 9, I think.
Oh, okay.
And none survived.
No.
Wow.
They scrapped the last one. Nobody wanted to mess with it. So now there's a party trying to get the one up from the Pacific, which makes no sense to me.
With lots of 6-inch holes in it.
Yeah.
Bob, I had heard what's probably a rumor that the drawings were etched on aluminum and then scrapped for the war. Does that sound right to you?
Mm-hmm.
They wouldn't have done the drawings on vellum or paper?
No. Drawings for these airplanes and the Clipper were drawn full size on aluminum. Aluminum has the same shrink rate and expansion rate as the metal parts that they were going to be built on, the aluminum. Everything was drawn full size. And they didn't do it any
Had
other.
drawings?
Beg pardon?
They didn't.
They had drawings, yeah, but the original drawing was drawn full size on aluminum and then photographed with very accurate cameras so that you had a production drawing size view of it. But the original drawing was on a 4 by 8 foot sheet of aluminum with a white lacquer coating that was abrasive, and you drew with silver solder pencils, brass pencils filed down to a very, very fine line. And there were guys on their hands and knees drawing all the parts. The original aluminum drawings then were photographed to make a copy, an exact size copy, and templates were cut right out of that to make the parts, the actual parts. And that's a process that people
Sounds pretty expensive.
Yeah, but what the heck, you're only getting $1 an hour, so it was not expensive. Well, that's the Dash 80, the 367-80, the first Boeing jet transport. I saw them build that, and we talked about that already. And that's the one that set the pace for everything else that followed. The strut-mounted engines, the swept wing. Any successful jet transport after that had this kind of layout and philosophy.
There were no windows.
No,
Was there cargo?
no, it was a test plane. It was a prototype. And eventually it had the boom operator's position and the boom put on it and all sorts of other things. But they had just little bitty oval-shaped windows in the cabin. You didn't need anything for passengers then, so that's the way that one was done. 757, one of the best, short-lived. And this is a print of the original painting. The original was purchased a couple of years ago. So, well-loved by pilots. This was the first 707 PA, Papa Alpha. I worked on that airplane, and I saw the first flight. And an interesting part of that was that Juan Tripp, an American again, said that the airplane had to fly before 1959 or we will apply a heavy fine or a heavy a fine or something in the contract. They were having a terrible time with the exhaust gas temperature harness. The engine kept burning it up. And so they finally got it fixed, and on December 28th and 27th, I did my memory, it was raining, low ceiling. Tex Johnson came out, got in the airplane, taxied down to the north end of the runway at Renton, turned it around, and it was raining. Blew hundreds of gallons of water out into Lake Washington and took off to the south over Renton. And people said, no, you can't do that. He did. He went the other way, but he did not. Took off over Renton, and we could barely see him. He started a right turn around Beacon Hill, disappeared into the mist, and landed at Boeing 7.5 minutes later. So they got their first flight in, and they didn't get hit with that stipulation for one trip. But it's an interesting story about that. One of the most interesting incidents with 707 Papa Alpha was when it was being flight tested by Lew Wallach off Catalina Island, out in the Pacific there, running some fuel balance loads or some kind of test like that on it. And they were getting low on fuel, so they headed east back to Edwards Air Force Base where they were operating out of. Realized that they would be flying right over Long Beach Airport where the DC-8 was. And it was getting ready for its first flight. So Lew asked the tower if they could make a flyby at 3,000 to 5,000 feet so that they could look at the DC-8. And the tower came back and said, "Are you the 707?" And Lew said, "Yes, we are the 707. 707 Papa Alpha." And they said, "Well, you can make a pass at 3,000 if you want, or 2,500. And as they were approaching the airport or the coastline, the guy comes on and says, "Actually, you can make a pass at any altitude you want." So they made a pass with the gear down and a couple of clicks of flaps and flew the length of the runway and poured the power on, and were climbing out behind 4 trails of black smoke. And at the time, the restaurants and coffee shops were full of press people waiting to record this first flight of the DC-8. They heard this jet go by and ran out and looked and could see this jet climbing away. And they thought, well, okay, they flew the DC-8 without telling us, so they filed their reports and went home. When it came time to fly the DC-8, there weren't many people there. And said that Donald Douglas flew into a rage and called Bill Allen and was just raging at him. And poor President Allen didn't have any idea what he was talking about. He didn't know what Lew Wallach was doing or anything. And he was caught flat-footed. And I think that's one of the best stories about it.
What is the tower allowed to fly by? Why allowed the tower allowed 707 to fly by that low altitude?
They wanted to see it.
Oh, they want to see it.
It was the only one in the world.
Yeah, only one in the world. First jet transport, they shut everything down and said, "Come on, make a flyby as low as you want." You said,
they can see it. Okay.
Yeah. I thought that was fun. And he said that they were going to go down and do some more testing down near San Diego when they were getting ready to fly the 880. But they figured it was too far down south to go or something like that. But, Lew.
Oh, because Convair was down there and they were getting ready to fly the 880.
Yeah.
They could have done it again.
The same thing. Yeah. But he figured maybe we better not.
Yeah. Then they would know they meant to do it.
Yeah.
And Douglas would. Yeah. Douglas probably was going to forever think that anyway, right?
Well, around that time, Bill Allen held an all-hands meeting with management, and our supervisor came back after the meeting and said, Bill Allen did something that isn't much like him, or, was a surprise. He said that he intended to run Donald Douglas out of the skies.
Oh.
Yeah. So I don't know what he said or what he meant, but our supervisor said that. And maybe this was from the incident and the...
Probably didn't help, did it?
Yeah. And one other good story about that airplane is that when they were building the 41 section. We were at work one Sunday up in the third level of the final assembly building, and the factory was being run. It was Sunday. The factory was being run by the tooling supervisor. We were in the tool design, and he got a phone call and ran out of his office down to the assembly line, and we knew something had happened. And an hour later, he came back and told the story of a foreman telling a guy standing there next to the nose with some tools, and he said, "Drill out this bad rivet." And this supposedly mechanic, guy that had tools, said, "Okay." And so he went and got a drill and drilled holes all the way around the rivet and knocked it out with a ball peen. and it
Well, that's one way to drill out a rivet.
It was one of these frames up front here that tied into the doghouse where the nose gear went in. I mean, it was highly loaded.
Yeah.
And, oh my God, you know, Chet Robinson was the supervisor's name, the manager. Ran down there and asked the guy, the foreman. He said, "Now, you told him to drill the rivet out?" The guy said, "Yeah, I did it the same way I do it to my tractor on the farm." Turned out the guy was a tool room clerk, picking tools up to take back in to read.
He just made an assumption that he was a line mechanic.
Yeah, the foreman didn't ask him if he was a mechanic. He drilled that rivet out, and this poor guy was obedient and went ahead.
So now there's two guys that are getting reassigned. The
Not
foreman,
the mechanic.
Yeah, not the mechanic.
No,
Right,
he did
he
what
was-
he was told to do. He wasn't a mechanic,
Yeah.
and he was never asked if he was a mechanic.
It would have helped if he would have said, "But I'm not a mechanic."
Some of these guys, you know, "Hey, boss, I'll do what you want."
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So there were a lot of incidents like that. Another one was the electrical heating wiring that had to go to the de-icers in the horizontal tail. The guy that mocked it up, got in the mock-up, cleared it, everybody bought it off, it was okay, it was a good installation. We went ahead and drew it up, how to get the wiring in there. When the airplane hit the line, we got a call, "Your drawings are wrong, you know, we can't install this like you say." "What do you mean, you know?" It says, "Well, we can't reach it. We can't get to the ribs where this thing makes a break and ties into the electrical heater." So we went down, and sure enough, nobody could reach it. Well, the guy that did the mock-up was a black guy, probably 6'7", with arms that long. He had to go down and fix it and finish it, but had to redesign the whole installation because nobody had arms the same length that Sam did. And he says, "Well, there goes my job security." And that was a fun incident with that guy. So,
Yeah. Nice.
so it all wasn't seriousness.
No. So those jet exhaust on those nozzles were, was that for noise suppression?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Engineers call that sound attenuators,
There you go.
not sound attenuators. It just pre-mixed the
It's a forced mixing.
pre-mixed the hot air,
exhaust
and,
air.
yeah,
Right.
and it did silence. Same thing that this does on the 787.
Chevron.
The chevron slots let cold air bleed into the high bypass there, and it has a silencing cuff around it. So this is the last one I did. Kind of difficult, and a lot of all the little bitty lettering and everything on it. But what a beautiful airplane.
Why you decided to do the 787?
Big pardon?
What inspired to do the 787?
Just to continue the sequence. So I did the first.
I don't say 777.
I'm working on it.
Okay.
I have several paintings at home that I'm working on. But I wanted to get this one done because it was the latest. And so I'll keep trying to get the others finished. I have a 777 in work. I have some paintings of the first takeoff of the B&W. Oh, that's sitting down here and I never said anything about it. Got one more. Boeing's first. That was fun to do. I like that one.
Tell us about how you did the sponsons, because that's impressive.
The sponsons? Cedar? You mean about Pocock?
Just the challenge of getting that to look right.
It really wasn't a challenge. No, I laid it out to get the cedar strips on and just kept working in the normal color down through here, and then where the shadow hit it, the highlight had a little blue cast, and then the rest of it, I wanted to put the shine on the wood like it was varnished. It had been varnished, but that was easier to do than some of the other stuff on it, really, for me. But one of the interesting stories about that, when Boeing was building the replica, I knew a lot of the guys who were working on it, and one of them, Vic Seeley, called me one day and he says, "We'd like to get the drawings that you did of the floats on your drawing of the seagoing Jenny." The Navy had a JN-9 and it had floats on it. And I said, "Well, I don't have a drawing for those floats." And it was silent for a while. And he says, "You didn't have any drawings, how'd you do them?" And I said, "Well, I scaled them off of photographs and got the dimensions right and the length and everything, and painted them that way." And he said, "Huh." He said, "We used your drawing on the floats on the Curtis thing, and got the layout started on it." It's really funny. I said, "Well, I don't have any drawings, so good luck." But they did find some old sketches on brown paper of the floats and got it done all right. But they were built just like Pocock, the shell builder here built them. But all of this stuff was much more difficult than the floats. To get the color of the fabric right there in the shade. First Boeing, B&W, and the most recent, 787.
Well, Bob, thank you so much for this wonderful history tour.
Thank you.
Fantastic.
I hope it was interesting.
I never thought that.
The little gal that hung all of these, Josie, asked me if I had any artifacts from old Boeing works or whatever, and I said, "Yeah, I have a few things." This is all mine that I gathered up. My old templates and triangles and calculators and just any old artifact I could find. There's even a field service manual to a B-17G in there, and old ink pens, and there's templates in this envelope that probably never be used, but I threw the B-29 drawing in, so she arranged it all to show how it was done in the old days. All hands and eyes.
So, Bob, when you created this original B-29, I mean, you would presumably lay out the key outlines or dimensions, like maybe a center line from which you would then draw some cross sections, and upper and lower, kind of the...
No, I laid out a
How would you do
center line drawing. All the frames at the stations they're at, ribs. I had all the Boeing drawings, all the B-29 drawings that I worked from to get all the stuff done. But start out with a skeletal drawing of just the stations and the shapes, and then filled it in with the pieces.
So would you do that original in pencil?
Mm-hmm.
Like a 3H or something like that? Or
On linen.
on linen?
Yeah.
And then on top of that, you would flesh it in with ink for your final?
No, I did it pencil on linen, and then to get it on a large format or large illustration board, I had the Boeing people make a silk screen of it.
Oh.
And then painted over the silk screen. The drawing on linen is still, I have it at home.
You do? How cool.
And
But that doesn't have all these details. That has
Yes.
basically... It does?
no, this is it right here.
Yeah.
The
Okay.
drawing on linen. They silk screened it, and then I put the paint on it.
Oh, okay.
Painted every little thing. That still is one of the funniest incidents. I was telling Dave about doing a painting for an airline pilot, and just as a little joke, I left a white patch with a little blue number down in the lower right corner. I didn't say anything about it, and he was looking at the painting, and I could always catch his eye looking down there at that little number. And I should have used that on all my paintings as a talisman, you know. But that was a lot of fun.
And you got your badge.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I remember this pen, fiber.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh.
It's really funny. My grandson looked at this drawing and some of the other drawings that I had. He said, "Grandpa, how do you get all the lines so straight?" They've never used the tools that we had then, or the techniques. But you know, I've got probably a couple of $1,000s in tools and templates and stuff that'll never be used again that we used back there then.
How long you guys been using this Pentel pencil?
Oh, gosh. Some of these things
More than 30 years.
got to be 30, 35 years old.
God, same design. I'm still using that.
Yeah, I use that at home. I have that tool. I have that tool. I mean, a lot of these were very common. That we would have a lot of them. But see, think of the perhaps millions of people that have those tools, but they never make something like that, Bob.
Yeah. That was fun. Real good project.
And you did model box art. This 247?
Yeah,
That's
I
yours.
designed that box and the cover in the painting.
Very cool.
Yeah.
How about this one? Is this your drawing also?
No, that's a photo that I found in a magazine.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. 707.